Something I have wondered about for years is this. We are told 4 people built Hogwarts, and we are never told how. So tonight, we are going to find out by taking the castle away. Everything you are about to hear begins 1 year after the war. From a single change on the night of the battle. Every death in that battle still happens. Only the castle's fate is different. Argus Filch noticed it first, and nobody listened to him because nobody ever listened to Argus Filch. It was the 10th of June, 1998, 5 weeks after the fighting stopped, and the castle was full of hammering. Half of Britain seemed to be in it. Ministry workers were levitating fallen blocks back into the walls of the entrance courtyard. 24 volunteers were regrowing the greenhouses under Professor Sprout's direction. Somebody had brought a wireless, and it played thin, cheerful music from a windowsill on the second floor all day long. Filch hated the music. He hated the volunteers, who left their tea things everywhere. He walked his rounds at night the way he had walked them for 40 years, at the hour when the castle was his, with his lamp in one hand and Mrs. Norris slinking along the skirting boards. That was when he found the staircase. It was the one that ran from the 4th floor to the 5th, the shortcut behind the tapestry of the drunken monks. It swung always, twice an hour, out over the stairwell and back. Filch knew its rhythm the way a sailor knows a tide. He had waited on that landing 10,000 times. He waited 11 minutes. The staircase did not move. He put his hand flat on the banister, and this is the part he could never explain to anyone afterwards. The stone was cold. Not cold like winter stone, cold like a thing that has stopped. Filch was a squib. He had lived his whole life inside magic without a single spark of it in him, and it had made him strange and sour and cruel about mud on floors. But it had also made him something no wizard in that castle was. He knew Hogwarts by touch. He knew it the way you know a person's footsteps in a corridor. Wizards felt the castle's magic and never thought about it. The way you never think about air. Filch had never felt it once in his life. So he had learned the building itself. Every warm patch of wall, every stair that creaked on the 3rd tread, every echo. That was the other thing. He noticed it as he went back down. There was no echo. He stopped in the middle of the 2nd floor corridor and stamped his boot. Hard. Twice. In that corridor, a stamped boot came back at you off the far wall a half second later. It had done so since before he was born. Now the sound went out of his foot and simply died in the air, as if the corridor had gone deaf. Filch went and woke the headmistress. Minerva McGonagall came out onto the landing in a tartan dressing gown with her wand up, because it had been 5 weeks, and every one of them still expected the war to come back through a window at night. She listened to him, that should be said for her. She listened while a caretaker told her that a staircase had stopped swinging and a corridor had stopped echoing, and she did not laugh, and she did not send him away. She cast 3 spells on the banister. All 3 worked perfectly. The stone was stone. There was no curse on it, no residue, no trace of dark magic at all. Argus, she said at last, and she sounded tired rather than unkind. The castle has been half destroyed. Things are broken. We will mend them. It isn't broken, Filch said. Broken things are still there. She did not have an answer for that, so she wrote it down in the morning, in the long list of small wrong things she was keeping in a drawer, and she went back to bed, and she did not sleep. 12 days later, on the 22nd of June, the ceiling of the Great Hall went out. It happened at breakfast. There were about 60 people eating, mostly workers and staff, and the handful of 7th year students who had stayed on to help. The ceiling was showing a bright, breezy morning sky with high clouds moving east, the way it had shown the weather above the castle for 1,000 years. And then it was a ceiling. Grey stone, ribbed, with cobwebs in the corners, nobody had ever seen because nobody had ever been able to see up there. Nobody screamed. That is what Neville Longbottom remembered about it afterwards. 60 people put down their cutlery at the same moment and looked up at a stone roof. And the hall was completely silent. And then somebody at the far end started to cry. To understand what had happened to the castle, we have to go back 5 weeks and 2 days to a room on the 7th floor at 2 o'clock in the morning. You already know most of that night. You know that Voldemort's forces broke the boundary at about 9 in the evening on the 1st of May. You know that the castle fought back, that the suits of armour came down off their plinths, that the stone knights walked, that the statues and the desks and the very banisters rose up and threw themselves at the men and women who had come to take the school. You know the names of the people who died there. I'm not going to change one of them tonight. What I'm going to change is one detail, and the detail is fire. Somewhere around 2 a.m, 3 boys who should have been nowhere near the 7th floor were in the room of requirement. Gregory Goyle, Vincent Crabbe, Draco Malfoy, Harry, Ron and Hermione were in there too, hunting the last of the objects they had come back to the castle to destroy. And it went wrong, and Crabbe did something he did not understand. He cast Fiend Fire. Cursed fire is not fire. That is the thing wizards forget, because it looks like fire, and it burns like fire, and it kills like fire. Ordinary fire eats wood, cursed fire eats magic. That is why it can destroy the objects nothing else can touch. It goes for the enchantment first and the timber second, and it grows while it eats, and it takes the shapes of hunting animals, because on some level it is hunting. Crabbe could not hold it. It killed him. It swallowed 1,000 years of hidden and abandoned things in that room, and it swallowed the diadem Harry had come for. And the 6 of them got out of there on 2 broomsticks, with the fire coming up the corridor behind them like a wave of snakes. In the timeline, you know, the fire stopped at the door. The room of requirement sealed itself, and the cursed fire burned what was left inside it, and then burned itself out, because that is what fiend fire does when it runs out of things to eat. Here is our change. In this timeline, the fire did not run out of things to eat, because it found something better. Draco Malfoy was the last of the 3 out of that room, and he was the only person who looked back. He told this to a Wizengamot committee 8 months later, under oath, and it was the single most useful sentence anyone said in that entire year. He said that the fire did not spread across the floor, he said it went down. He watched a burning thing the shape of a very long dog put its head against the flagstones, and the flagstones did not blacken, and they did not crack. They opened. The fire poured into the floor of Hogwarts like water into sand, and it went out of sight, and the room went dark, and he ran. Nobody thought about it again for weeks, because there was a war on the 7th floor, and Draco Malfoy had rather a lot else on his mind. But if you want the exact minute the castle died, that was it. Not the explosion that killed Fred Weasley, not the courtyard, not the bridge, not the tower. A dog made of cursed fire, putting its head down into the stone and finding something underneath worth eating. The rest of that night went exactly as it went. There was an hour's truce near midnight. Harry walked into the forest. Voldemort died in the entrance courtyard at sunrise on the 2nd of May, with the whole school watching, and the Elder Wand ended the morning in Harry Potter's hand. There was only one strange thing, and everybody blamed it on exhaustion. Near the end, in the last 20 minutes before dawn, the castle stopped helping. The Stone Knights slowed, 3 of them stopped mid-stride in the entrance hall and stood there like ordinary statues, one with its sword still up. The suits of armour that had been fighting since 10 at night went quiet altogether. Professor Flitwick, who had been directing them, said afterwards that it felt like a rope going slack in his hands. He assumed his own strength had failed, he was very old indeed, and he had been casting without pause for 8 hours, and he was too proud to say so out loud, and so he said nothing about it for 6 weeks. By the time anybody put those things side by side, the ceiling of the Great Hall had gone out, and the portraits had begun to fall asleep. That was the part that frightened people. A dead ceiling is a dead ceiling. A sleeping portrait is somebody you know. They went one at a time, over about 10 days. Sir Cadogan first. He was mid-challenge, roaring at a passing workman about honour, and then he simply stood still in his frame, with his visor up and his mouth open. He did not answer. He did not move. The paint did not fade. He was just a painting of a fat knight, which is all he had ever been, except that for 600 years he had also been a nuisance and a friend. The fat lady went silent on the 29th of June. Nobody could get into Gryffindor Tower after that. Not because she refused, but because there was nobody there to refuse. In the end, they took the frame off the wall, and Professor Sprout cut the canvas out of it with a kitchen knife, crying the whole time, and rolled it up and put it in a chest, because the alternative was leaving her hanging in an empty tower. The headmistress sent for a curse breaker on the 1st of July. She did not send to the ministry. He sent an owl to Shell Cottage, to a young man who had spent 5 years breaking 1,000-year-old Egyptian bindings for Gringotts, and who happened to be the eldest brother of a boy who had died in that castle 9 weeks before. Bill Weasley came up the drive on foot on the 2nd of July, with his wife beside him and a leather roll of instruments under his arm, and he stood in the entrance hall and looked at the 3 stopped knights for a long time before he said anything at all. "Nobody touch anything," he said. "Nobody cast anything. Not a Lumos, not a Tempus, not one spell inside these walls until I say." "Mr. Weasley," said a ministry surveyor, "we have 40 men working." "Then they are all going outside," said Bill. It took Bill Weasley 9 days to work out what was wrong with Hogwarts. And the way he did it is worth understanding, because everything that came after grew out of those 9 days. He did not use spells. That was the first rule, and he never broke it. He used chalk, string, weighted lines, a set of copper rods, and a goblin-made instrument called a needle that does nothing except lie still and point at magic, the way a compass points at north. Curse breakers do not begin by casting. Casting is how curse breakers die. He started in the dungeons and worked upwards, and he chalked a number on the wall every 20 paces, and Fleur wrote the numbers down in a ledger, in a very small, neat hand. By the 4th day, the ledger had 900 numbers in it. By the 6th day, Bill had stopped talking to anybody at meals. On the 9th day, he asked for the whole staff, and Harry, and Ron, and Hermione. And he laid a map of the castle out on the high table with rocks on the corners to hold it flat. "I need to explain something first," he said, "and you are all going to want to argue with me, so let me finish. What do you think the enchantments on this castle are?" "Spells," said Slughorn. "Very old, very fine spells, laid one on top of another for 1,000 years. "That is what I thought too," said Bill. "That is what everybody thinks. It is wrong. Spells decay. Every spell ever cast decays. And the bigger it is, the faster it goes. And if this castle were built out of spells, then every headmaster for 1,000 years would have spent his whole life recasting the staircases, and he would still have fallen behind. You cannot maintain 1,000 years of enchantment. Nobody has that many hours." "Then what is holding it up?" said McGonagall. Bill put his finger on the map, in the middle of the lake. "There is a vein of deep magic under this valley," he said. "It runs from about a mile past the far shore of the lake, under the lake, under this castle, and out into the forest. My needle has been pointing at it for 9 days. It is not something anybody made. It is like a seam of coal. It is simply there, and it has been there longer than people have." He looked around the table. "The 4 of them did not enchant a castle," he said. "They tied a castle to the ground, they gave their own magic into that vein, and they told it what to be, and then it kept itself. That is why the staircases move, and nobody recast them. That is why the Room of Requirement can invent a room nobody has ever asked for. That is why this building fought for you in May. It was not spells, it was alive, in the way a tree is alive, and it was fed from underneath." "Was," said Hermione. "Was," said Bill. He turned the map over. On the back, he had drawn the same valley, and across it, in chalk, a long grey stain running from beneath the 7th floor, down and outwards. "Cursed fire eats magic," he said. "Crab's fire got through the floor and into the vein, and it has been eating down there since the 2nd of May. It is not burning anymore. There is no heat. There is no light. There is nothing to see. It is more like rot now. It moves about 4 feet a day. It has already taken everything under the east half of the castle, which is why your ceiling is dead, and your portraits are asleep, and your staircase has stopped. Those things were not broken by the battle. They starved. Somebody, I think it was Madame Pomfrey, asked the obvious question. Can it be put back? This is where Bill Weasley did the bravest thing he did that year, which was to tell 12 people he liked the truth. "You can lay new magic over a burnt vein," he said. "It holds for a while. I've seen it done on a tomb in Egypt. And then the burn finds it and eats it and comes back stronger and faster than before because you have just fed it. Every spell you cast in this castle from now on is food. Every lumos, every locking charm. That is why I stopped your 40 men." There was a long silence in the great hall under its dead grey ceiling. "How long?" said McGonagall. "For the castle?" 18 months, perhaps 2 years, before there is nothing magical left in it at all. It will still be a building, drafty, enormous, and completely ordinary." He paused. "For the vein?" longer. It will keep going until it reaches the end of the seam, unless something stops it. And the far shore, said Hermione. She was looking at the chalk line on the back of the map, at the part of the vein that ran out under the water and away, clean and unmarked. The far shore is untouched, said Bill. For now, at 4 feet a day, the burn gets there in about a year. Nobody said anything clever. Nobody had a plan. It was the 9th of July, 1998, and the school was supposed to open again on the 1st of September, and there were 432 children in Britain with letters already addressed to them. They tried to save it anyway, of course they did. I want to be fair to them, because the plan they came up with was not a stupid plan, and it was made by the best people available, and it very nearly worked. It was Professor Flitwick's plan, with Hermione's arithmetic in it. If the burn eats new magic faster than one wizard can lay it, then do not use one wizard, use 100. Lay new magic into the vein faster than the burn can consume it, all along the front of the burn at once, and starve it by getting ahead of it. Bill said no. Bill said it 3 times, and then he was outvoted by a room full of teachers who had watched children die in that castle in May, and were not going to sit still and watch it die too. And he stayed anyway, because his brother's name was going to be carved on a wall in that building. They found the 100 easily. That is the part that still gets me. They put a notice in the Daily Prophet on the 12th of July asking for qualified witches and wizards willing to give a week to Hogwarts. And by the 14th, they had 1,100 names, and they had to turn people away. Every member of the old order who was left came. Every teacher came. Oliver Wood came, and Angelina Johnson, and Lee Jordan, and Hannah Abbott, and Susan Bones, and Ernie Macmillan, and Terry Boot, and Padma, and Parvati Patil, and Dean Thomas, and Seamus Finnegan. Luna Lovegood came up from Devon with her father's old caravan and slept in it on the lawn. Ginny Weasley came, and when McGonagall said she was 16 and this was adult work, Ginny said that she had been doing adult work in that castle since she was 11, and McGonagall let it go. They worked in shifts of 26 hours each, standing in a line in the dungeons and the sub-cellars, with their wands down at the floor, pouring magic into stone. It is the dullest heroism you can imagine. No duelling, no glory, just adults standing in a cold cellar for 6 hours holding a spell until their arms shook and somebody tapped them on the shoulder to take over. And it worked. That is what made it so cruel. On the 3rd day, the shortcut behind the tapestry of the drunken monks swung out over the stairwell, twice an hour, exactly on time. On the 4th day, the 7th floor corridor had an echo again. On the 6th day, at supper, Sir Cadogan woke up in his frame and demanded to know who had let the castle get so dusty, and 200 people in the Great Hall cheered a portrait of a fat knight until they were hoarse. On the 7th day, the ceiling came back for about 40 minutes and showed them a summer evening. On the 9th day, the 21st of July, at 4:20 in the afternoon, everything they had given it came back out. It came out through the dungeon floors, and there was nothing to see, and that was the horror of it. There was no fire, no noise, no shape. It was simply that everyone in the lower castle went to their knees at the same moment. Ron said it was like the feeling when a Dementor comes near, if a Dementor were under you instead of in front of you, and if it were interested in your hands. The burn had reached the new magic, and a burn that has been given 9 days of 100 wizards' work does not eat politely. It went from 4 feet a day to something Bill later measured at 90 feet in the first hour, straight up the vein under the west half of the castle, and it took the new magic and the old magic and everything in between. 22 people were in the dungeons. 11 of them got out on their own. Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom went back down twice and dragged out 4 more between them. Hagrid, who is not much use in a corridor but is extremely useful in a stairwell, carried 3 at once. Ginny got the last 2 by breaking a window with her elbow and floating them out over the lake in the dark, which is not a thing a 16-year-old should have to think of, and which she thought of in about 4 seconds. Nobody died. I want to say that plainly, because after the year they had all just had, it matters. Nobody died in the dungeons on the 21st of July, but Phileas Flitwick was the last one out, and he did not come out the same. He had been holding the front of the work when it turned, and he had tried to shut it down cleanly, one wizard against the whole weight of it, and something in him tore. He was in St Mungo's for 3 weeks. When he came out, he could still do magic. He could charm a teacup, mend a chair, light a lamp. He could not hold a shield for more than a few seconds. The finest duelist of his generation, the man who had held the boundary of that castle for 8 hours against an army, could no longer keep a shield up long enough to matter. He never once complained about it in front of anybody, and he never went back into the dungeons again. And every plan that came afterwards had his handwriting all over it, because he did the one thing he could still do better than anyone alive, which was to check other people's magical arithmetic for the mistake that kills them. On the 23rd of July, from a hospital bed, he sent one line to the headmistress: "Minerva, we were mending the wrong thing. It cannot be mended, it must be made again." That is the sentence this whole story hangs on, so hold on to it. 3 days later, they began carrying Hogwarts out. An evacuation sounds like a fast thing. This one took 19 days, and almost all of it was done by hand, because every spell cast inside those walls was feeding the thing underneath. They moved the library first. Madam Pince had been the librarian at Hogwarts for 31 years, and had spent all 31 of them being unpleasant to children about the books. And now the books were leaving, and nobody could levitate them, so she organised it. She stood in the doorway of the library with a slate and a piece of chalk, and she ran that operation like a general. Books went out, in wooden crates, carried down the stairs by hand, in order, by section, and every crate was numbered on the slate before it went, and no crate left that room until she had signed it. Volunteers who tried to hurry her were removed from the building. On the 4th day, somebody dropped a crate on the marble staircase, and 42 books of magical theory went down the steps. And Madam Pince made a sound that people talked about for years. The restricted section. She packed herself, alone, at night, with gloves on. And she never told anybody what was in the last 2 crates. And nobody ever asked her. The portraits went into a warehouse in Diagon Alley, rolled with linen between them. The sleeping ones did not know. The waking ones did. And that was harder. Old headmasters and headmistresses in their frames, some of whom had not left that office in 400 years, being asked to be taken down off a wall and put in a tube. Dumbledore's portrait was awake. He had woken in the summer of 1997, and he had been in that office ever since. And when they came for him, he asked to be the last one out of the room, and he asked to be carried, not rolled. Harry carried him down the spiral stair himself, face outwards, so the painting could see the walls going past. Neither of them said very much on the way down. Near the bottom, the portrait said, "I am extremely glad I did not live to see this." And Harry said, "So am I." And that was the whole conversation. The elves would not go. There were about 100 of them, and Hogwarts elves are bound to Hogwarts. And they had been bound to it for so many generations that some of them did not have a word in their language for anywhere else. They stood in the kitchens with their arms full of copper pans and refused to walk out of the door. And no argument worked, because every argument was about the future, and their whole world was about the walls. Hermione went down and could not do it. She had spent 4 years arguing about elves, and she knew every fact and every figure, and she could not get a single one of them to move. And she came back up the stairs and sat on the steps of the entrance hall and put her head in her hands, and that is where Kreacher found her. Kreacher was the elf of the House of Black, and he was old and vile, and he had loved a boy who died for the right reasons. And in May, he had led the Hogwarts elves out of the kitchens with a carving knife to fight for a castle that was not even his. He went down to the kitchens and he spoke to them, and nobody knows what he said because he said it in the kitchens with the door shut, and he never repeated it. What we know is that after about an hour, an elf named Tally came up the stairs. Tally was the head of the Hogwarts kitchens, and she was, by her own reckoning, 206 years old. She had a copper ladle in her hand, which she carried everywhere and used as a kind of walking stick, and occasionally a gavel. "The elves is not leaving Hogwarts," she said to Hermione. "Hogwarts is leaving. That is different. We will go where it goes. But Tally is asking a question first, and Tally would like the answer to be true, because Tally has been told things before." "Ask," said Hermione. "When it is made again," said Tally. "Who writes it down?" "I do not know yet." "Then Tally is watching," said Tally, and she went back down to pack the copper. Hold on to that, because Tally is going to ask a question again at the exact worst moment. The ghosts were free to leave, and mostly did not want to. A ghost is tied to the place where they chose to stay, and the tie is not something they can undo. Nearly Headless Nick went out onto the lawn and found he could go about half a mile past the boundary, and no further. And he came back and said, quite calmly, that he had known since 1492 that he had made his bed, and he supposed this was the part where he lay in it. Helena Ravenclaw, whom the school had called the Grey Lady for 500 years, did something nobody expected. She came and found Harry Potter on the lawn on the 5th day of the evacuation, and she asked him what he was going to build. "I do not know that we can build anything," said Harry. "My mother was 31 years old when she began," said Helena Ravenclaw. "She had one book and a bad temper, and no money at all." Then she looked at the castle for a while and said, "I watched them do it. I was 9. I remember all of it. If you decide to try, come and find me, and I will tell you what I saw." Harry did not follow that up for 2 months, and he has said, since that those 2 lost months are the thing he would go back and change if he could go back and change anything. Peeves refused to leave and could not have left if he had wanted to. A poltergeist is not a ghost. A poltergeist is a knot of chaos that a place ties in itself when enough children have been unhappy in it for enough centuries. And Peeves was as much a part of that building as the foundations. He spent the whole 19 days making it worse. He dropped crates, he undid knots, he followed Madame Pince along the corridors, singing an extremely rude song about her nose. And then on the last day, when the entrance hall was empty and echoing, he sat on the top of the empty door frame where the fat lady had hung, and he did not throw anything, and he did not sing. He just watched them go. The last 2 people out were Argus Filch and a boy of 15 named Dennis Creevey. Dennis had come with the volunteers in July, and he had stayed on through the evacuation carrying crates. His brother Colin had been 16 years old and about the size of a garden gnome, and had died in that castle on the 2nd of May, having sneaked back in because he could not bear to be sent away. Dennis had not spoken about him once in 3 weeks. He had simply carried crates all day, every day, until people started giving him the heavy ones because he would not stop. On the last day, he was carrying a small tin box, which held Colin's camera and the 11 rolls of film Colin had not developed yet. Filch locked the front doors. He had a ring of keys with 67 keys on it, and he used them all. And it took a long time, and nobody hurried him. He was the caretaker. It was his job. Then he stood on the steps with his cat under his arm and looked back up at the castle. And Dennis Creevey stood beside him with a tin box. And Filch said the only sentimental thing he is known to have said in his entire life. 43 years I have swept that hall, he said. Never once heard it quiet. Then the 2 of them walked down the drive, and Hogwarts stood empty above the lake, with its windows dark. And it was the 11th of August, 1998. 3 weeks later, the Ministry of Magic decided that Britain did not need a school. They did not put it like that. Nobody in a government has ever put anything like that. What they said was much more reasonable. And this is important, because if you think the enemy in this story is a cackling villain, then you will miss the whole shape of what happened. Kingsley Shacklebolt had been Minister for Magic for 4 months. He had inherited a ministry with half its staff either dead, arrested, or too frightened to come in. A Muggle-born register that his own department had written. 112 unsolved murders. A prison with no guards. And now, no school. He was an honest man doing an impossible job with a broken machine, and he had 432 children to educate by the 1st of September, which was 9 days away. So, the ministry did the sensible thing. Beauxbaton offered 90 places. Durmstrang offered 40, which everybody found awkward, and 40 of which were accepted anyway. Ilvermorny, in America, offered 30. For the rest, the ministry licensed what it called regional instruction centres. In practice, this meant a qualified witch or wizard renting a village hall 3 days a week and teaching 30 children charms out of a borrowed textbook. By November, there were 19 of them. Some were rather good. The one in Godric's Hollow was run by the school's ancient runes teacher, Bathsheba Babbling, and it was excellent. Some were dreadful. The one in Falmouth had one teacher for 60 children and no potions at all, because nobody would insure a cauldron in a rented hall. And here is the trap, and it is the kind of trap that catches whole countries. The centres were cheap. They were 9 times cheaper than a castle. By December, there were people in the ministry doing sums and finding that Britain could educate every magical child in the country for a fraction of what Hogwarts had cost, with no wards to maintain, no elves to feed, and no 1,000-year-old vein of deep magic to worry about. The man who saw that first and used it best was Ambrose Selwyn. You will not have heard of him, and that was the point of him. Selwyn was 79 years old and had sat on the Wizengamot for 41 years. He had never taken the Dark Mark. He had never been in a duel, never been arrested, never been photographed with anybody who was. 3 of his cousins had gone to Azkaban in 1998, and he had voted to send them there, and he had done it without blinking. And everybody noticed. He was the most dangerous kind of opponent, which is the kind who is not a hypocrite. Ambrose Selwyn genuinely believed 3 things. He believed that the old magic of Britain was the only thing that had kept wizards alive in it. For 1,000 years, he believed that it must never be rewritten by people who did not understand it. And he believed, with total sincerity and no cruelty at all in his voice, that a muggle-born girl of 18 with excellent examination results was the least qualified person in Britain to write the words that would shape 1,000 years of magic. On the 8th of September 1998, he stood up in front of the Hogwarts Board of Governors and made 3 motions. The first was that the name Hogwarts, the school's endowments, its vaults at Gringotts, and its charter of 993 were the legal property of the trust established by that charter and could not be transferred to any new institution. The second was that the land in the valley, all of it, both shores of the lake and the forest, was held by that same trust for the purposes of the school described in the Charter of 993 and for no other purpose. The third was that the board should recognise the regional instruction centres as the lawful successors to the school's teaching duty. He got all 3, 9 votes to 4. That evening, in the kitchen of number 12, Grimmauld Place, Hermione Granger laid out what that meant on a piece of parchment in 3 lines and then read it out loud to Harry and Ron because saying it made it real. "We cannot use the name," she said. "We cannot use the money, and we cannot use the ground." I should tell you what those 3 were actually doing in September 1998, because none of them had set out to build a school. That idea did not exist yet. It had to arrive, and it arrived slowly, and it arrived at the worst possible time for all of them. Kingsley had offered Harry, Ron and Neville places in the Aura office without qualifications on the strength of what they had done in the war. Ron had taken it. He started training on the 7th of September, and he was, to everybody's mild surprise, extremely good at it, because Aura work turns out to be about 80% noticing that a room is arranged wrongly, and Ron Weasley had been noticing the arrangement of things since he was old enough to play chess. Harry had not taken it. He kept meaning to. The paperwork sat on the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place for 5 weeks with a cup of tea ring on it. He had spent 7 years being aimed at something, and now nobody was aiming him. And he had discovered the thing that nobody warns you about, which is that when the war ends, you are still the person the war made, and there is nowhere to put that person. He also had the Elder Wand. He had made a decision about that on the 3rd of May, standing in the headmaster's office with the wand in his hand, and the decision was to put it back in Dumbledore's tomb and let its story end quietly, with a man who had never been beaten. He had gone up to the white marble tomb by the lake twice that summer to do it. Both times he had turned round and come back down. The reason he gave himself was practical. The tomb was on land that was about to be legally frozen and physically dying, and he was not going to leave the most dangerous object in the world in the ground of a condemned building. The reason he did not say out loud was that his own wand, the holly wand with the phoenix feather, had been snapped almost in 2 at Malfoy Manor, and there is exactly one thing in the world that can mend a broken wand, and he had used it, and it had worked, and he could not stop thinking about what that meant. Not the power, the repair, everything else in his life that had been broken had stayed broken. He had held the one object that put a thing back the way it was. Hermione, meanwhile, was in Australia. She went on the 14th of September, alone, with a ministry travel permit and a great deal of unspoken terror, to a suburb of Sydney where 2 dentists named Wendell and Monica Wilkins had been living happily for 14 months without any idea that they had a daughter. She got their memories back. It took 11 days and 2 healers from the Australian ministry, and it worked, and it was not clean. Her mother remembered everything at once and had to sit down on the floor of the surgery. Her father remembered in pieces over 4 days and kept apologising for things he had not done. There was a whole night, Hermione has said, when her mother could not look at her, and that night was the worst night of her life. Worse than the forest, worse than the manor. They forgave her. Parents mostly do, and these two were good ones. But she came home on the 27th of September, 19 years old, and knowing something about herself that she had not known before, which was that she was capable of taking a person's whole life away in order to protect them, and telling herself it was kindness. She got back to Grimmauld Place at about 11 at night, and Harry was awake in the kitchen with the oral paperwork and a cold cup of tea, and she sat down and said, "I have been thinking about the Charter of 993. "That is not a normal thing to say when you come home from Australia," said Harry. "Selwyn said the ground is held for the purposes of the school described in the Charter, so I got a copy of the Charter." She put it on the table. It was 4 pages of a magical facsimile, and the original was in Latin and Old English, and the runic shorthand of about the year 1000. "Harry, it is 900 words long, that is all. 900 words. And it made all of that. What does it say?" "It says almost nothing about teaching," said Hermione. "There is 1 line about the 7 years, and 1 line about the subjects. The rest of it is who may come in, who may not, who is bound to it, what may never be done inside it, and what happens to anyone who breaks it." She looked up. "It is not a school prospectus. It is a set of rules for a piece of magic. They were not writing an advertisement. They were giving instructions to the ground." That was the first time either of them said out loud the sentence that Flitwick had written from his hospital bed. "It cannot be mended. It must be made again." And then Harry said the sensible thing, which was, "By who? Because it is not going to be us. We are 18 and 19. I did not finish school. Hermione, I did not finish school." 2 weeks later, on the 12th of October, they went to see the sorting hat. The hat was in a locked cupboard, in a ministry storeroom on level 4, in a wooden box lined with acid-free paper, which is a genuinely awful sentence to have to write. It had survived the battle. Voldemort had set it on fire on Neville Longbottom's head, and it had come out of that with a sword in it and a scorch mark on the brim, and its opinions entirely intact. McGonagall came with them because the hat was Gryffindor's, and she was not going to let 2 teenagers open that box on their own. So did Ron, who had taken the afternoon off training and told nobody why. Harry put it on. Now, everybody who has ever worn the sorting hat knows the strange doubled feeling of it. The sense of a voice inside your own head that is definitely not yours. What nobody outside that storeroom understood until that afternoon is where the voice comes from, and the hat explained it, because Harry asked it directly. "You are asking me how I know things," said the hat. "Good. Nobody has asked me that in 400 years. They asked me where to put children. I will tell you. When the 4 of them made me, they did not enchant a hat to be clever. That is beyond anyone. What they did was put something of their own minds into the lining, so that I would know a Gryffindor when I saw one, because part of me had been Gryffindor. There is a piece of all 4 of them in here, not their souls. Nothing so dark. Call it their judgment." "Then you were there," said Harry, "when they built it." "I was made 3 years after," said the hat, "but their memory of it came in with the rest. I know how it was done, boy. I have known for 1,000 years, and nobody has ever needed to be told, because until this summer, the thing had never come undone." That was the beginning of what those 5 people afterwards called the sessions, and there were 14 of them between October and February, and they were the strangest research project in the history of magic. Here is how they went. Somebody put the hat on. The hat talked. Hermione wrote. Nobody was allowed to interrupt in the first hour, because the hat lost its thread. Bathsheba babbling came to the 4th session onwards to write down the runes, because the hat kept giving them the words of the Charter of 993 in the original. And Hermione's Old English was, by her own furious admission, not good enough. and by the third session they understood that the sessions were killing it. It came out sideways, the way that sort of thing does. On the 3rd of November, the hat stopped in the middle of a sentence about the anchoring of the lake and said, "Who am I speaking to?" "Harry Potter," said Harry. "Yes," said the hat. "You are the one who argued with me. That was 7 years ago. I remember it. I am telling you that I had to look for it." A pause. "There is a great deal in here about the founding, and I am reaching in a long way to get it. When I come back out, I am bringing less of myself with me. You should know that, because I do not think you will stop asking, and I do not think you should stop asking, and I would rather you knew what it costs." They stopped for 9 days and argued about it. McGonagall wanted to end the sessions outright. Hermione wanted to continue, and hated herself for wanting to continue. In the end, it was the hat that settled it, in a very short session on the 12th of November, in which it said one thing: "I have sorted 250,000 children." It said, "I have never once been asked to do anything else. I would like, before I go quiet, to have been of use in a way that was not a formality. Ask me your questions." So they asked, and this is what the hat gave them: over 14 sessions. And it is the whole engine of everything that comes next. A binding needs 3 things, and it needs all 3 or nothing happens at all. The first is ground. Deep magic in the earth, unburnt, and there are not many such places, and they cannot be made. The second is a giving. Living magic, given out of a living witch or wizard freely and irreversibly. Not lent, not channeled, given. The way you give away money and do not have it anymore. The 4 of them each gave a quarter, and what they gave never came back. And every one of the 4 was measurably weaker for the rest of their lives. Rowena Ravenclaw, the hat said, had been the finest enchanter in Europe before 993, and never again produced anything to match her early work. People had put that down to age. It was not age. The third is a charter. Words spoken aloud on the ground and cut into stone that tell the binding what it is for. And here the hat was more insistent than on anything else. And it made Hermione read the sentence back 3 times before it would go on. The binding does exactly what the words say. Not what you meant, not what you would obviously have wanted. What the words say, for as long as the binding lasts, which is longer than the language the words were written in. "Give me an example," said Hermione. "Salazar wrote a line about who might come in," said the hat. "He wrote it in the plural and in the future tense, and he did not define his terms because he assumed that everyone would always know what he meant by blood. That single line has been trying to enforce itself for 1,000 years, and it has never been able to, because the other 3 wrote lines that contradicted it, and the ground has been arguing with itself under that castle since the year 1000. The hat paused. "You have all felt it. You call it the house rivalry." There was one more thing in the hat, and it did not want to talk about it. On the 29th of November, Hermione put the hat on for the first time. She had avoided it for 6 weeks. She said afterwards that she had told herself it was because Harry's memory for spoken detail was better, which was not true, and because McGonagall preferred it, which was also not true. The real reason was that she had been 11 years old the last time that thing was on her head, and it had taken 4 minutes to decide about her. 4 minutes of a voice in her skull weighing her up, and she had never in 8 years admitted to a single person how much that had frightened her. She put it on and asked her question, which was about the wording of a clause on inheritance, and something in the hat said no. It was not the hat's voice. That is the part she was completely certain about. Then, and for the rest of her life, the hat's voice was dry and amused and rather like a very old schoolmaster. This one was quiet and pleasant and extremely patient, and it did not raise itself once. "You are the girl who is going to write it," said the voice. "Somebody is," said Hermione. "You are Muggle-born." "Yes. I want you to understand that I have nothing against you personally," said the voice. "You are plainly the cleverest person in this room, probably the cleverest in the building. My objection is not to you, it is to the arithmetic." A pause, almost gentle. "There were 4 of us, and we had 200 years of practice between us, and we still got it wrong. There will be 2 of you, and one of you is 18 and did not finish his education, and the other one is you. You will write 900 words that a piece of the earth will obey after every language you know is dead. Tell me honestly, do you believe you are equal to that?" And Hermione Granger, who had an answer for everything, sat in a ministry storeroom on level 4 with a hat on her head and could not think of one single thing to say. "No," she said. "Good," said Salazar Slytherin. "That is the first true thing anybody has said in these sessions. Now take the hat off, girl, and go home and let this country teach its children in village halls, because a bad charter is worse than no school at all, and I am the only one of the 4 who has ever been honest about that." She took the hat off. She was shaking. Ron took it out of her hands and put it back in the box and closed the lid, and then he sat down on the floor of the storeroom next to her chair, which was not a very dignified place for a trainee aura to sit, and stayed there for about 20 minutes without saying anything at all, which was exactly the right thing to do, and which not one other person in Britain would have thought of. Later that night, at Grimmauld Place, Harry said the thing that turned it round. "He is not wrong," he said. "That is the trouble. He is right about the arithmetic, and he is right that we are not qualified, and he still wants the wrong thing. Hermione, he wants the school not to exist. He has wanted it since about the year 1000. He is not warning us. He is arguing." "He is arguing very well," said Hermione. "He always did," said Harry. "You can be right about everything, except the one thing that matters. Now." The hat had told them that a binding needs unburnt ground, and there was none available, and every plan they had was stuck on that until the 11th of December, when Hermione worked out that they were wrong about the burn. She was wrong for a good reason. Bill Weasley had told them all in July that the burn had eaten everything under the castle, and so it had. But Bill's needle had shown one thing he could not explain, and had written down and set aside, and Hermione found it in the ledger on page 9, in Fleur's small, neat hand. Underneath the girls' bathroom on the second floor, there was still something down there. Because of course there was. 1,000 years ago, one of the 4 had a disagreement with the other 3, and before he left, he built himself a private room, and he put it below the level of the lake, and he sealed it off completely, and he made a door that could only be opened by a man who could speak to snakes. Salazar Slytherin's quarter of the binding was not damaged. It was the only working piece of original Founders magic left in Britain, and it was sealed behind a door that had not been opened since 1993, because the only 2 people alive who could speak Parseltongue had been Voldemort, who was dead, and Harry Potter, who had lost the ability on the 2nd of May when the fragment of Voldemort inside him was destroyed. They stood in that bathroom on the 12th of December, all 4 of them, and Harry hissed at a copper tap for 10 minutes and produced nothing but hissing, and it was one of the most humiliating afternoons of his life. And then Ron Weasley said, "Move." You have to understand that Ron had done this once before. In May, with Hermione, he had opened that sink by copying a sound he had heard Harry make years earlier, remembering it the way you remember a snatch of a song in a language you do not speak. He had done it once, under fire, and it had worked. And he had never told anybody how frightening it had been. He did it again. It took him about 40 seconds. He got it wrong twice and swore, and then he made a noise that was not a word in any human language, and the sink sank into the floor. "How?" said Hermione. "I have been down there once," said Ron. "You do not forget anything about that day." They went down. Harry, Hermione, Ron. And, because Bill Weasley insisted that no curse-breaking survey went into an unknown chamber without a 4th person watching the entrance, Draco Malfoy. I should explain that. Draco had come to them in October, not out of friendship. There was no friendship there, and there never really was. He had come because his mother had told him to, and because he had worked out, faster than his father ever did, exactly how much trouble his family was in. The Malfoys had not gone to Azkaban, because at the very end, Narcissa Malfoy had lied to Voldemort's face to find her son, and Britain had decided, grudgingly and by a narrow vote, that this counted. What Britain had not decided was to speak to them. They had a house, and a great deal of money, and no invitations at all. So Draco had turned up at Grimmauld Place with a folder, and said, in a voice like a man reading out a shopping list, that he had watched the fire go into the floor, that he could describe exactly what it had looked like, and how long it had taken, that he was the only living witness to it, and that he supposed they would want that. Harry had asked him why he had come. "Because in about 10 years I would like to be able to send a child of mine somewhere," said Draco, and at the moment I would not be able to. That was all. It was not a redemption. It was self-interest, and it was honest about being self-interest. And Hermione said afterwards that she trusted it more than she would have trusted an apology. The Chamber of Secrets in December 1998 was a very long stone room, a great deal of standing water, and the 60-foot skeleton of a basilisk with a hole in the roof of its mouth. And it was warm. That was the thing they all noticed within about 10 seconds. Every stone in Hogwarts had been cold since June. In here, the walls were warm to the hand, the way the banisters used to be. Hermione put her palm flat on the wall between two carved serpents and started to cry. And she was not embarrassed about it, and she said, "This is what it felt like. This is what the whole castle felt like, and I never noticed once in 7 years." They worked in the chamber for 11 weeks. It is the least glamorous heroism in this entire story, and it produced everything. Bathsheba Babylon came down on a rope ladder at the age of 66 and read the walls. Bill mapped the vein with his rods and found that Slytherin's quarter was joined to the main seam by a single narrow neck of magic, about 9 feet across, sealed at both ends, which is why it had survived. Flitwick could not come down, so they carried the copies up to him, and he sat in a chair in the bathroom above with a blanket over his knees and checked every line of arithmetic they brought him. And twice he found errors that would have killed somebody. And on the walls of that chamber, in runes and in the plain old English of about the year 1000, cut by a man who expected nobody to read them, they found the working notes of a founder, not a manual, notes, the measurements he had used, the proportion of the giving, what he had tried first and abandoned, a line about the difficulty of anchoring anything under moving water, which explained, at last, why the lake had always been the strangest part of the castle's magic. There was a passage complaining about Godric Gryffindor that Bathsheba Babling refused to translate for 3 days out of what she called professional discretion, and which turned out, when she gave in, to be about his handwriting. And there was the thing that made all 4 of them go quiet, which was a line near the door, cut deeper than the rest, that had been added later by an older hand. It said, in effect, that he had made a mistake in the wording of his part, that the mistake could not be corrected, and that he had built this room so that at least 1/4 of the work would be safe from what the other 3 were going to let in. He had known, 1,000 years ago, Salazar Slytherin had known that he had written a bad clause, and he had never been able to take it back, because the binding does exactly what the words say, and only a living founder can change them, and he was not going to admit an error to Godric Gryffindor in front of witnesses. "That," said Hermione, sitting on the wet floor with a notebook on her knee, "is the most human thing I have ever read." By the end of January, they had it, all of it. The measurements, the proportions, the sequence, the shape of the words. They had, written in 3 notebooks in Hermione Granger's handwriting, the only complete account in existence of how you found a school. And they had one problem, which Bill Weasley put in front of them on the 2nd of February with his chalk map and his measurements, and which changed the whole thing from a research project into a race. The burn was still moving. It had eaten everything under the castle, and it had turned west, along the seam, under the lake, towards the only unburnt ground within 100 miles of them, the far shore. 4 feet a day, said Bill. It would have taken until next summer, except that in July, we fed it 9 days of 100 wizards, and it jumped 90 feet in an hour. That hour cost us 5 months. He tapped the chalk. It has about 130 days of seam left. Call it the middle of June. If you want to found anything on that ground, you have to do it before the burn arrives, because afterwards there will be nothing there to found it on. And if we start building, and it feels new magic, said Harry. Then it comes faster, said Bill. Yes, everything you do to save that ground makes it harder to save. They had 130 days. A set of notebooks, no land, no money, and no name. And on the 9th of February, Ambrose Selwyn took the one thing they did have. The Daily Prophet came out on a Tuesday with a photograph of Harry Potter on the front page, walking out of the Ministry visitors' entrance, and the photograph had been enlarged and sharpened so that you could see very clearly the wand in his right hand. It was not the holly wand. It was 15 inches, dark, knobbled along its length like a young elder branch, and any wand-maker in Europe could have identified it from a drawing. The article did not accuse him of anything, That was the craft of it. It simply reported, at length, and with quotations from 3 respectable sources, that the wand carried Harry Potter since May 1998 appeared to match every historical description of the Death Stick, the wand of Antioch Peveril, the wand of Destiny, the object that a dozen separate wizarding chronicles agree cannot be beaten in a duel. It noted that Gellert Grindelwald had carried it. It noted that Albus Dumbledore had carried it. It noted that both of those men had been, in the writer's careful phrase, extremely difficult to remove. And then it asked one question, in the last line, and it was the right question, which is why it did so much damage. Why has he still got it? Rita Skeeter wrote it. Of course she did. And here is a small thing that I find one of the most interesting moments in this whole year. Hermione went to see her about it, and Hermione had something on Rita Skeeter, a piece of information about how she got her stories that would have ended her career in a morning, and she had used it before to keep her quiet for a year. She did not use it. She sat in Rita Skeeter's office and she said, "You are going to write about us either way. I would rather you wrote it accurately," and she gave her the file, the whole file. The vein, the burn, Flitwick, the elves, the notebooks, all of it. Rita Skeeter, who was many bad things but was not stupid and had spent 12 months being ignored because everybody assumed she had been on the wrong side, printed the lot in 4 parts over 4 weeks. And it was, by a wide margin, the best work she ever did. It did not make people love Harry and Hermione. It did something more useful. It made 400,000 people in Britain understand that there was a thing eating the ground under Hogwarts, and that nobody in the ministry had told them. But that was March. In February, the prophet had a photograph of an 18-year-old boy holding the most dangerous object in the world. And Ambrose Selwyn stood up in the Wizengamot on the 16th and, in a speech of 11 minutes that never once raised its voice, requested that the ministry take possession of the wand for the safety of the public. He was right, incidentally. That is the awful part. He was completely right. Read his speech back, and there is not a false word in it. A boy of 18 with an unbeatable wand, building an institution, with an enormous personal following, on land he claims to have a moral right to. Selwyn asked the chamber to imagine that same sentence describing anybody else, and quite a lot of the chamber went pale, because for 11 months they had all been trying very hard not to think about the fact that a teenager had personally ended a war, and that nobody had any idea what to do with him next. Harry gave evidence on the 22nd of February. He was asked whether he intended to surrender the wand. He said no. He was asked why, and he told them the truth, which was not the clever answer. "Because I need it," he said. "The binding has to be cut into stone, and the stone has to be true for 1,000 years. Every wand in this room could cut it. Not one of them could cut it deep enough not to weather. That wand mends things that cannot be mended. I have tried it on a broken wand and it worked, and I did not want it to work, and it did." He looked up. "You are asking me to hand you the only tool that will do the job. 920 days after the last time this country locked away a thing it did not understand and then lost it." He lost the vote, 61 to 44. The Wizengamot ordered him to surrender the Elder Wand into ministry custody within 30 days. And then Kingsley Shacklebolt did the single most quietly courageous thing any politician does in this story. And it nearly cost him his job. He signed the order, then he put it in a drawer and did not send it. And when he was asked about it, he said the department responsible was under review. And the department responsible was under review for 4 months because he kept reviewing it. I want to be clear that Harry did not win that argument. He was ordered to give it up by a lawful court in a country he had just helped to save. And he did not comply, and he knew exactly what that made him. He wrote to McGonagall about it, and she kept the letter. It has one line in it that tells you everything about the difference between the boy in 1998 and the man he became. "I've read Dumbledore's biography twice this month," he wrote. He also thought he needed it for something good. By the 1st of March, they had 100 days, notebooks, an illegal wand, and still no land, no money, and no name. They dealt with the money next, and the money took them to the last place on earth, Harry Potter wanted to go. Gringotts had not forgotten May 1998. Let us be honest about what happened there. 3 teenagers had broken into the Wizarding Bank using a stolen wand, an imperious goblin and a polyjuice disguise, robbed a vault, destroyed a considerable quantity of goblin property, freed a captive dragon and left through the roof. The fact that they had been doing it to end a war is a fact the goblins accepted without in any way accepting that it settled the account. Goblins keep books. Everything in this world to a goblin is either owed or paid. They had also stolen a sword. The sword of Gryffindor is goblin made. It was forged by Ragnarok I, and every goblin alive believes, and can cite 11 centuries of documents to support, that goblin made objects belong to the goblin who made them and to no one else, and that Godric Gryffindor did not buy that sword so much as fail to give it back. Griphook had said so to Harry's face in a room at Shell Cottage, and Harry had promised him the sword and then had not given it to him because he needed it, and Griphook had taken it anyway during the robbery and then lost it again, and after the battle it had ended up in a ministry vault. So on the 9th of March 1999, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, Bill Weasley and Percy Weasley walked into Gringotts to ask for a loan. The goblin who received them was named Skarnak, and he was the head of the bank's contracts office, and he had a face like a closed door. He let them talk for 50 minutes. He asked 11 questions, all of them about numbers. And then he laid out the bank's terms, and the terms were brutal and completely fair. The bank would fund the founding, materials, stone, timber, glass, the labour of goblin masons for the vaults and the locks and the doors, and a line of credit against the personal vaults of Harry James Potter and the estate of Sirius Orion Black, which Harry had inherited, and which turned out, after 200 years of the House of Black not spending money on anything except being unpleasant, to be very large indeed. In exchange, the bank required 3 things. First, the return of the Sword of Gryffindor to goblin kind in perpetuity, with a public acknowledgement of the claim. Second, every lock, door, gate and vault in the new school to be goblin made, goblin maintained and goblin owned, leased to the school for a peppercorn rent renewable every 100 years, which sounds like a technicality and is in fact the single largest concession any wizarding institution had made to goblins since the rebellions. Third, a clause in the charter, not a place at the school. Goblins do not want their children taught by wizards and had no intention of asking. What Skarnak wanted was 1 sentence, and he had it written out already, and it said that no object made by a goblin and held within the school might ever be sold, given or inherited by any witch or wizard, and that the maker's name would be recorded beside it. Ron said no. Ron said no very loudly, and he said it for about 4 minutes. And I will not pretend his reasons were good ones, but I will tell you that they were real. Neville Longbottom had pulled that sword out of the sorting hat, with a burning hat on his head, and cut the head off Voldemort's snake with it in front of an army, at the exact moment when the war turned. That sword was not a piece of property to Ron Weasley. It was the last 4 seconds of the war. "It is not ours," said Hermione. "It is Gryffindor's," said Ron. "Gryffindor did not make it," said Hermione. "Ron, we have spent 5 months reading a wall written by a man who could not admit he had made 1 mistake, and it cost 1,000 years. We are going to write 900 words that outlive our language. Do you want to start with a stolen sword in the first line?" Nobody in that room had an answer to that, and they were all still arguing about it 3 days later when Neville himself came in, having been sent for, and was told the position. Neville Longbottom thought about it for a while. Then he said, "Was it his sword when I used it?" "Legally, no," said Percy. "Then it worked anyway," said Neville. "Give it back." The sword went back to the goblins on the 20th of March in the atrium of Gringotts, in front of about 200 people. Harry carried it in and put it into Skarnak's hands and said out loud that it had been made by Ragnarok I, and that it had been held for 11 centuries by people with no right to it. Half the wizarding press called it a disgrace. There were letters in the Prophet for a fortnight. Ambrose Selwyn made a speech about the surrender of British magical heritage to foreign interests, which was, by his standards, almost angry. And Skarnak, the contract goblin, who had a face like a closed door, went back down to the forges and personally supervised the making of 7 pairs of doors, and they are still there. And if you look at the inside edge of the left-hand door of the Great Hall of that school, you will find a goblin's name cut into the metal, which is a thing that had never once been permitted in the history of wizarding Britain. Lucius Malfoy came to see them on the 2nd of April, and he came alone, and he had a bank draft in his pocket. I have thought about this scene more than almost any other in this story, because it is the one where the villain is not really a villain, and the offer is not really wicked, and it would have worked on almost anybody. He was not the man from the ministry atrium or the Quidditch box. He had come out of the war with a wife who barely spoke to him, a son who would not stay in the same room as him, a fortune nobody wanted to be seen taking, and the certain knowledge that he had personally opened his own front door to the thing that had ruined his family. He did not swagger. He sat in the kitchen at number 12, Grimmauld Place, in a house that had belonged to his wife's family, and that had been the headquarters of the people who defeated him, and he asked for a cup of tea. The offer was 250,000 galleons, unconditional, no publicity, in exchange for one clause, not a blood clause. He was much cleverer than that. What he wanted was a sentence saying that the founding families of the school, defined as those who contributed to its establishment, should hold a hereditary right of admission for their descendants. "You will have that anyway," he said. "You are going to write something about the children of staff, or the children of the volunteers, or some such. Everybody does. All I am asking is that the word is inheritable, and that I am inside the definition." "For how long?" said Hermione. "Forever, if you can manage it," said Lucius Malfoy. "That is generally the point of families." She turned him down, and she did it in a way that I think is the exact moment she stopped being a very clever girl and became a founder. She did not lecture him. She got out a piece of parchment and wrote his sentence on it. And then she wrote underneath it what the binding would do with it in 300 years, when nobody remembered who the founding families were, and the only way to establish the right was to prove descent. And the only body who could rule on proof of descent would be a registry. And the registry would need records, and the records would need to distinguish which families counted. "You have just asked me to build a blood register into the ground," she said, "and I do not think you meant to." There was a very long silence in that kitchen. "No," said Lucius Malfoy at last. "I did not." He looked at the parchment for a while. "My wife told me not to come." He took his bank draft and left. And that is very nearly the end of him in this story, except for one thing that happened 3 months later, which I will come to. His son, on the other hand, gave evidence to the Wizengamot on the 14th of April, in a public session, for 2.5 hours. Draco Malfoy stood in front of the assembled Wizengamot, including a great many people who had eaten at his father's table, and described exactly how the room of requirement had looked at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd of May. He described Crabbe casting a spell he had been told about by adults who should have known better. He described trying to stop him. He described the shape of the thing the fire made, and how it had put its head down into the floor, and how the floor had opened, and how long that had taken, which was about 4 seconds. He was asked 17 questions, and he answered all of them, including the ones about his own conduct, and he did not once try to make himself sound better than he had been. He was asked at the end why the 3 of them had been in that room at all. "Because I had been told that if we did not bring Potter to the Dark Lord ourselves, my family would be finished," said Draco. "I was 17. It was the only plan I had." Then he sat down, and, in the corridor afterwards, was sick. That testimony did 2 things. It gave Bill Weasley the last measurement he needed, because 4 seconds told him how wide the opening had been, and that told him the volume, and that told him the rate. And it destroyed the last respectable version of the argument that the ministry had been running since August, which was that nobody could be sure the castle had not simply been damaged by the fighting. It also, and this was not deliberate, made a fair number of people in that chamber realise that the war had been fought by children on both sides. Now to the land, which is where this becomes, of all things, a story about the reading of a document. Harry finally went back to Helena Ravenclaw on the 19th of April, 7 months after she offered, and he apologised for the 7 months. and she was gracious about it in the cold way of a woman who had been dead for 1,000 years and had learned to be patient with the living. They sat on the lawn above the lake, in front of the dark windows of a dead castle, and she told him what she had seen when she was 9 years old. She said her mother had not wanted to do it at all. Rowena Ravenclaw had been the one who held out longest, and the reason she held out was not the money, or the labour, or the danger. It was the permanence. She had understood, before any of the others, that they were about to give instructions to a piece of the earth that would outlast every one of them and every language they had, and that they would not be there to correct it. She fought them for 2 years about it, said Helena Ravenclaw. She would not put her hand to it. And then she got one sentence, and she signed the same afternoon. What sentence? Said Harry. I do not remember the words. I was 9. I remember my mother coming in and saying, I have got it, and Godric laughing at her. A pause. It was about the day it broke. She made them write down what should happen on the day it broke. Godric said it would never break. She said that was exactly why he should not mind writing it. Harry went back to London that night and got the notebooks out, and there it was on page 4 of the Hat's transcript of the Charter of 993, in a clause everybody had skimmed for 6 months because it was 14 words of legal formula in the middle of a passage about maintenance. The Hat had given them the words in October. Nobody had understood what they were looking at. Stripped of the runic shorthand, it said this: if the binding should fail, the ground and all rights in it pass to those who bind it again. That is all. 14 words, put in by a woman who did not believe in her own optimism, sitting in a room in the year 993, arguing with a man who thought she was being morbid. Percy Weasley read it 4 times and then said a word that his mother would not have approved of, because look at what Ambrose Selwyn had done in September. He had not argued that the land belonged to the ministry. He had not argued that it belonged to the governors. He had stood up in front of the board and moved, in his own words, that the land was held by the trust established by the Charter, for the purposes of the school described in that Charter, and for no other purpose. He had won that vote 9-4. He had made the Charter of 993 the supreme authority over that valley, on the record, in writing, because at the time it was the strongest weapon he had. Ron saw it before anybody else finished reading. He had been an Aura trainee for 7 months and a chess player for 18 years, and he looked at the parchment and started laughing, and he could not stop for some time. He has already agreed to it, said Ron. That is his own motion. He cannot say the Charter binds the land and then say one clause of it does not count. If he does, the whole motion goes, and if the motion goes, the land was never frozen at all. He wiped his eyes. He has locked the door and handed us the key and told everybody in Britain that he did it. The hearing was on the 4th of May, 1999, 2 days after the first anniversary of the battle, in courtroom 2, and it lasted 6 hours. Selwyn fought it properly. He argued that the binding had not failed but been damaged. Bill Weasley's 900 measurements and Draco Malfoy's 4 seconds killed that. He argued that the clause referred to repair, not refounding. Bathsheba Babbling took the court through the runic tense of the verb for 3/4 of an hour and established that the word used was the one for making a thing that does not currently exist. And she was so thoroughly the dullest and most credible witness anybody had ever heard that the court simply believed her. He argued that the clause could not have been intended to hand a national institution to private persons. And Percy Weasley, who had spent 9 weeks on this and had never in his life been happier, produced the drafting history from the Hat's transcript and demonstrated that intention was precisely what it had been. And then Selwyn stood up and made his last argument, and it was the honest one, and it was the only one he had ever really had. Very well, he said, the clause exists. The clause says what they say it says. Then, let me put the question, the clause does not answer. He turned round and looked at the two of them in the second row. Who are you? Not what have you done? I know what you have done, and I am grateful for it, and it is not relevant. I am asking what qualifies you. She is 19, he is 18, and has never sat an examination in his life. Between them, they have no degrees, no offices, no records, and one illegal wand. He turned back. The four who did this last time were the four greatest magical practitioners of their age, and they got it wrong, and we have spent 1,000 years living inside their mistake. Now the Earth's own document tells us to hand the next 1,000 years to 2 children, and we are going to do it. Because a dead woman wrote a sentence, and we are all far too tired to argue, he sat down. The court gave the ground to Harry Potter and Hermione Granger by a majority of 11 on the 4th of May, 1999. And on the way out, in the corridor, Hermione Granger stopped in front of Ambrose Selwyn and said, "Everything you said in there was true." "I know," he said. "Come and check the draft," she said. He stared at her. "You are the best reader in Britain and you want us to fail," said Hermione, "which means you will find every hole in it, and you will not be kind, and you will not miss any of them out of politeness. Nobody else in this country will do that for us." She held out a copy. "Find the mistakes, please." Ambrose Selwyn took the parchment. He did not say thank you, and he did not say yes. He sent back 11 pages of objections in 8 days in a very small hand, and 41 of them were right. The name came from Gringotts, and it came from Skarnak, and he charged them nothing for it, which for a goblin is roughly the equivalent of a hug. The Board of Governors still held the name. That motion had never been challenged and could not be, because it was perfectly sound. What Skarnak did in about 4 days was to go down into the deep records of the bank, which are older than the ministry, older than the statute of secrecy, and older than the school, and pull out a land ledger from the year 971. It recorded a payment of goblin silver for the working of a copper seam, and it gave the location, and the location was a valley beside a long lake in the Highlands, and the ledger gave the valley its name, because the goblins who wrote it had asked the people who lived there what the place was called. The name was already there 22 years before the 4 of them arrived. It was the name of the hill. It had been the name of the hill for as long as anybody in that valley could remember, and it had nothing to do with schools, or founders, or magic, and it almost certainly began as somebody's joke about a pig. So the Board of Governors owned the name of a school. Nobody had ever owned the name of the hill, because you cannot own the name of a hill. And Hermione Granger walked into the next board meeting with a goblin ledger from 971 and told them so, and there was nothing whatever they could do about it. Which is why, when people talk about what happened in that valley in 1999, they never say the new school. They say Hogwarts, and they always have. And legally speaking, they are talking about a hill. Then they wrote it, and the writing took 10 weeks, and it was the hardest thing any of them ever did. They worked in the front room at number 12, Grimmauld Place, because it was the only room big enough. There were 9 of them who did most of it. Hermione and Harry, Percy Weasley for the law, Bathsheba Babbling for the runes, Flitwick in a chair by the fire with a blanket and a red pencil, McGonagall, who arrived on the first day and said that she had no intention of interfering, and then interfered magnificently, for 10 weeks, Ron, when he was off shift, Ginny, who had been elected by about 200 displaced students at a meeting in a barn in Ottery St Catchpole to speak for them, and who took that more seriously than anything she had ever done, and Luna Lovegood, who said almost nothing for the first fortnight, and then, roughly once a week, said the thing that unstuck everything. They had 900 words, that was Hermione's rule, taken from the Charter of 993, and Percy hated it, and she never gave it up. 900 words, because every extra sentence was another sentence the ground would obey after they were dead, and because the 4 had managed in 900 and had still left a mess, and doubling it would not halve the danger, George Weasley came in once in the 5th week and stayed 40 minutes and gave them the single most useful document they had after the notebooks. He had not helped before that. He had not been able to. He had spent that year running a shop by himself with his brother's name still over the door, and when people asked him for anything he said no, and everybody let him, because everybody knew. What he brought was a piece of folded parchment that looked like rubbish, and was, in fact, the only accurate survey of Hogwarts in existence. 4 boys had spent 7 years mapping every corridor, stair, passage and hidden way in that castle, and they had done it not with measuring instruments but by walking all of it, at night, repeatedly, for fun. And because the map showed the castle as it actually was rather than as the plan said it was, and because it showed things that were not on any plan at all, Hermione was able to lay it over Bill Weasley's chalk map of the Vane, and find 11 places where a corridor had been built to follow the seam rather than the ground. That was how they worked out, in the space of one afternoon, which parts of the old castle had been shaped by the binding and which had merely been built by masons. 9 months of survey work, done by 2 boys who wanted to know a faster way to the kitchens. George would not take payment and he would not be thanked. And he asked for one thing, and it is the shortest clause in the charter. No passage of this school shall be written down. There are 7 of them in that building. The goblins cut them, and Skarnak's masons know where they are, and no wizard has ever had a plan of them. And to this day, the only way to learn where they go is for somebody who knows to show you. At night, on foot, which is exactly how it was always done. There were 4 fights. I am going to tell you all 4, because the school that exists is the shape of how they went. The first fight was about the houses, and it lasted 3 weeks, and it was the ugliest. Hermione's opening position was that there should not be any. She had the case ready, and it was strong. You take an 11-year-old on their first night in a hall full of strangers, and you tell them in front of everybody what kind of person they are, and then you house them, feed them, sit them and score them with the others of that kind for 7 years. She had numbers. She had gone through 40 years of records and found that a child sorted into Slytherin in 1971 had a 9 times greater chance of taking the dark mark than a child sorted anywhere else. And she put that on the table and said, quite quietly, that she was not accusing anybody of anything. She was asking whether it was possible to build a room and then be surprised by what grows in it. Ron fought her, Neville fought her harder, and their argument was not sentiment, although there was plenty of sentiment in it. "You are Muggle-born," said Neville, and he said it carefully. "So I do not think you know what it is you would be taking away. I was 11, and I could not do magic. I could not do one spell. My gran had me tested for being a squib twice, and a hat said Gryffindor, and 400 people cheered, and for 7 years I had a room full of people who had to sit with me at breakfast, whether I was any good or not." He shrugged. "That is what a house is. It is people who have to sit with you. It is not a prize." "Hufflepuff," said Ginny. "Nobody ever asks Hufflepuff. Take away the houses, and the person you have hurt most is not Slytherin. It is the house that has spent 1,000 years being laughed at and being kind anyway. You would be abolishing Helga Hufflepuff to solve Salazar Slytherin, and she never did anything to you." And Draco Malfoy, who came to about half of those meetings and was never once comfortable in that house, said the thing nobody expected. "Do not abolish mine," he said. "If you abolish it, every single person who thinks the way my father thinks will spend the next 100 years telling their children that there was a house for people like us, and Potter's lot burned it. You will make it a legend, leave it there with the name on the door, and make it possible to be a decent Slytherin. And in 50 years, nobody will remember what it was for." That was the argument that won. Luna solved the mechanism in about 11 words in the 3rd week, having said nothing at all that afternoon. "Why does it have to happen on the first night?" she said. "Nobody knows anybody on the first night." So this is what they wrote, and it is 1 sentence in the charter and a page of ordinary school rules underneath it, because Hermione had learned by then which things had to go into the ground and which things could go into a rule book that could be changed by a staff meeting. First years are not sorted. All of them, every child in the school's first year, live together, in one place, for 1 year. At the end of that year, they choose their own house, and they may change that choice once, at any time before they leave, without giving a reason. 4 houses, the same 4 names, nobody gets erased, and the sorting hat advises, except that it could not. And they knew it by then, and that is the second fight. And it was not a fight with each other. The hat had given 14 sessions, and it was going. By April, it could not always remember which of the 4 it was quoting. By May, it repeated itself. Hermione stopped the sessions on the 11th of May and closed the notebooks and said they had enough, and they did have enough. And she has never entirely forgiven herself for the last 4 sessions. They took it up to the Valley on the 18th of June, 3 days before the founding, and Harry put it on and asked it whether it wanted to be part of the new binding, which would have kept it going, in a way, tied into the ground like the rest, and the hat said no. "I was made to sort children by looking inside them," it said. "You have just decided, and I think rightly, that children should not be looked inside on their first night by an object. If I am in the ground, I will be in the ground doing that for another 1,000 years, because a binding does what the words say, and my words are old. A pause. Let me be a hat boy. Put me on a shelf. Let them come and ask me things if they want to. I have opinions about most matters. I intend to keep some of them. Harry asked if there was anything it wanted. Yes, said the sorting hat. 2 things. Do not put me in a case with glass. And when you write the part about who may come in, remember that Salazar was not lying to you in that storeroom. He was arguing. There is a difference. And the difference is the only thing I have ever known that a hat can teach. Then it said, well, ask me one more and be quick about it. I'm extremely tired. And Harry asked it what it thought of the charter. And the hat said, in the voice that was dry and amused and rather like a very old schoolmaster, Rowena would have liked the last line. Godric would not have understood it. Helga would have made you tea. And Salazar would have found the hole in it in about 4 minutes. And I have looked. And I cannot. And that is the best I have got. That is the last complete thing the sorting hat ever said. It has said single words since, a few times, on occasions that mattered, and it sits on a shelf in the headmistress's office, at the height of a child's head, with no glass in front of it. And every year some first year takes it down and puts it on, and hears nothing at all and puts it back very carefully, and that is right too. The third fight was about the elves, and it began the day Tally came up the drive with her copper ladle and asked her question again. When it is made again, she said, who writes it down? I do, said Hermione. Then Tally will say what she wants, and you will write what you like, said Tally. The elves is bound to Hogwarts, not to a family, to the place. That is old, and that is not the same thing as a family, and Wizards has never once understood the difference. She banged the ladle on the step. Tally has read about the Granger girl in the newspaper. Tally knows what you think. You think binding is wrong. I do think binding is wrong. Then do not write us in, said Tally. And in 200 years there will be no elves at Hogwarts, because an elf who is not bound to a place has nowhere, and there is nowhere else. You would have freed us out of existence and been very proud. She banged the ladle again. Tally does not want to be free. Tally wants to be able to leave. Hermione went away and thought about that for 9 days, and it changed her mind about something she had believed since she was 14, and the clause she wrote is the one she was proudest of for the rest of her life, and it is the only clause in the whole charter she wrote entirely by herself, at 4 a.m, on the back of a laundry list. The elves of the school are bound to the school, and not to any person in it. No witch or wizard may command an elf of the school to harm themselves, and no order of that kind has any force. Any elf may leave at any time and remains an elf of the school while they are gone, and the elves choose their own head, and the head of the elves speaks at every meeting where the school decides anything, and speaks first. Tally was the first. She held that position for another 40 years, and she was, by universal agreement, absolutely terrifying in a meeting. The 4th fight was the door. The 4 had written a line about who might come in. It was the line that had gone wrong. Slytherin had written blood and never defined it. The other 3 had written something contradictory, and the ground had been arguing about it for 1,000 years, and every child who had ever felt that a corridor did not want them had been standing inside that argument without knowing it. So they had to write it. 900 words, and this was the one everybody in Britain was going to read first. Ginny brought them a list. It had 81 names on it, and she had spent 4 months collecting it, going round the instruction centres and the villages and knocking on doors, and every name on it was a magical child in Britain who had not been at Hogwarts in 1997 and 1998 and had never had a letter. Some of them were Muggle-born children who had turned 11 in the year when a Muggle-born register was being kept by the Ministry, and their families had been too frightened to answer an owl. Some had been hidden by relatives. Some had had a letter that was intercepted. 2 of them had turned 11 in 1997 and were now nearly 13, and had spent 2 years setting things on fire in Muggle houses and being told they were badly behaved. The first name on Ginny's list, because Ginny had put it in alphabetical order, was a girl in Manchester named Nell Ashby, aged 12, who had made every window in her mother's kitchen sing on her 11th birthday and had been taken to 2 doctors about it. And the 80th name on that list was not Muggle-born and not a child who had missed a letter. And Ginny had put a question mark beside it because she was not sure it belonged there, and she had put it in anyway. Cordelia Selwyn, age 9, granddaughter of Ambrose Selwyn, a squib. A squib cannot be taught magic. That is not a policy, and it is not cruelty. It is simply a fact, and every wizarding family in Britain had dealt with it the same way for 1,000 years, which was quietly and with a great deal of shame, and usually by sending the child to live with a Muggle relation and not mentioning them again. Argus Filch was in the room when Ginny read that name out. He was there because Hermione had asked him to come, and she had asked him to come because he had spent 43 years in that castle, and nobody had ever once asked him anything. He did not make a speech. He said one thing, and he said it looking at the table. I could read the map of it, he said. By the time I was 12, I knew that building better than any of the teachers. I could not do a spell in it. Nobody ever thought there was anything in this world for a person like me except a bucket. So they wrote the door clause in 2 halves, and the second half is the half nobody expected, and the half that is carved over the entrance. The first half says that the school is open to every child in Britain in whom magic is found, and it defines that by the magic and by nothing else. In 11 words that Ambrose Selwyn himself corrected the grammar of, because Hermione had sent him the draft and he had done what she asked. The second half says that the school is also open to the children of the magical world in whom no magic is found, to be taught its letters, its lore, its history, its beasts, its crafts, and its ways, and that no child of that world shall be turned from the door for what they cannot do. That was Filch's clause. He never called it that, and he would have been appalled to hear anybody else call it that. He taught the first class of it himself, 11 children in a room with a fire in it, and he was, by every account of every one of those 11, a completely awful teacher for the first 2 years, and a rather good one after that. Cordelia Selwyn was in the 2nd year of that class. Her grandfather brought her himself on the first day of it, in a black coat, in front of about 40 people who all watched him do it, and he did not speak to anybody, and he signed the register, and he left. Then there was the last line, and the last line took 8 days, and it is the reason this school is different from the one it replaced. Hermione's position was that there had to be a way to change it. Everyone's instinct was against her, and their instinct was not stupid. Think about what she was proposing. The 4 had written words that could only be altered by a living founder, and when the 4 died, the words set like concrete, and that was the whole reason a bad clause had been eating away at the place for 1,000 years. Fine. But that same rigidity was the reason that when a dark wizard had walked into that castle and taken it over in 1997, he could not touch the charter. He could put a Death Eater in the headmaster's chair and put Muggle studies on the curriculum and torture children in the dungeons, and he could not change one word of the ground, because the 4 were dead and the words were fixed. "You are describing the safest school in Europe," said Percy. "I'm describing a room with a bad clause in it and no door," said Hermione. "And if you put a door in it," said McGonagall, "then in 100 years, somebody like the last one walks in with the right 40 votes and rewrites the ground itself, and there is no floor left to stand on. Miss Granger, I have thought about this for 11 months, and I do not think you can have it both ways." That was the state of it for 6 days. And then Harry Potter, who had said almost nothing for 6 days, said the thing that unlocked it. "It is the wrong question," he said. "You are both asking who should be allowed to change it. Ask instead who has to be in the room." Nobody understood him at first, so he said it again in a way that everybody in that room understood, because every one of them had been in that castle in 1997 and 1998. "When they took it over," said Harry, "the first thing they did was empty the room. They put Muggleborns off the register, they put the elves in the kitchens, they stopped the ghosts talking, they locked the centaurs in the forest. Whatever else they were going to do, first they got everybody out of the room who might say no." He shrugged. "So, make it so you cannot change the ground unless all of those people are in the room and all of them agree. Not a majority, All. And that is the last line of the charter, and it is the only line of it that most people can quote. And here it is in the plain modern English it was rewritten into in 1974, because the original is in the old shorthand. No of this may be changed except by all those it binds, together, in one place, and no change shall stand without the voices of those who are kept out. That is why the amendment of the Charter of 1999 requires the staff, the elves, the ghosts, the students, the centaurs, the mer people of the lake, the goblins who hold the doors, and the school's muggle-born register, all of them, all agreeing, in one room on one day. It has been done once. Ambrose Selwyn read that clause and sent back 3/4 of a page on it, and every word of the 3/4 was an objection. And at the bottom he had written, in the same small hand, one sentence that was not an objection. "It cannot be done," he wrote. "That is the cleverest thing in the document, and you know it, and I resent you for it." They finished the draft on the 27th of May, 1999, at about 2 a.m, and Hermione read the whole 900 words out loud to the 8 other people in that room. And when she had finished, nobody clapped, because it did not feel like the sort of thing you clap. 2 days later, on the 29th of May, somebody tried to save Hogwarts. There were about 40 of them, and they were not criminals, and they were not Death Eaters, and most of them were quite old. They had raised 11,000 galleons by private subscription. They had hired 4 independent curse breakers from Bulgaria who had never worked on a founder's binding in their lives, and they had gone up to that valley in the night with the entirely honourable intention of relighting the old binding under the castle before the new one could be made. They believed, and they had good reason to believe, that Bill Weasley had been wrong. Bill Weasley was 30 and had been paid by the school and had a brother's name on that wall. They had asked for a second opinion for a year and never been given one. So they went into the dungeons of a condemned castle and they poured new magic into a burnt vein for 4.5 hours. And it did exactly what Bill Weasley had told the Wizengamot in writing, in a report they had all been sent, that it would do. They were extremely lucky. Nobody died because the front of the burn was 2 miles away under the lake by then, and what came back at them through the floor was a fraction of what had come up at Flitwick. 9 of them were treated at St Mungo's. 2 of them never held a wand properly again. Bill Weasley went up at dawn with his rods and measured it, and came back down the drive white to the lips, and he sat on the bottom step and told them the number. The burn had been 130 feet from the neck of Slytherin's Quarter, moving at 4 feet a day with 3 weeks in hand. It was now 11 feet away and moving at 9 feet an hour. "It has been fed," said Bill. "It will slow down again when it has digested. But it is going to reach the neck tonight. And after the neck, it is 900 yards of clean seam to the far shore. And at that speed, we do not have 3 weeks. We have somewhere between 2 and 5 days. They could not found in 2 days. The stone was not cut. The runes were not carved. Half the charter was still on parchment. The giving needed all of them in one place, and Bathsheba Babbling was in Devon, and that is the moment when Ron Weasley won this. And I want to say clearly that everything else in this story is other people's work, and this part is his. He had been staring at Bill's chalk map for about 10 minutes while everybody else argued, and then he said, "Let it in." "Let what in?" said Harry. "The chamber." Ron put his finger on the neck, the 9-foot join between Slytherin's Quarter and the main seam, sealed at both ends for 1,000 years. It is 11 feet from the biggest meal it will ever get. A whole quarter of the original binding, intact. 1,000 years old, never burnt. "Bill, how long does it take to eat that?" Bill Weasley looked at the map for a long moment. "Weeks," he said. "It would sit there for weeks." "Then it sits there for weeks," said Ron, "and it is not going anywhere near the far shore while it does, and we get our 3 weeks back." There was a silence in that room, and it was not a happy silence, because everybody had understood at the same moment what he was actually proposing. "Ron," said Hermione, "that is the only piece of original Hogwarts left in the world." "I know. The chamber, the walls, his notes, the measurements, all of it. We have copied all of it," said Ron. 3 notebooks. You checked them twice and Flitwick checked them once. There is nothing down there we need anymore except 1,000 years of magic, that we cannot use and cannot move. He looked round at them. It is a piece. You are all looking at it like it is a monument. It is a piece, and we are behind, and you give up a piece to get a tempo. They asked Draco Malfoy because it seemed to all of them that somebody should, and because he was the only one there whose family had spent 400 years being proud of that room. He came up to the valley that afternoon and stood in the bathroom on the second floor of a dead castle and looked at the open sink for a while. My father used to tell me about the chamber when I was 7, he said. It was the best story I knew. There was a room under the school that only our sort could open, and one day somebody would open it and put the school right. He put his hands in his pockets. Then somebody did open it, and the caretaker's cat was petrified, and a girl very nearly died, and my father lost his seat on the board. And in May, a fire went into the floor because 3 boys who had been told that story could not do one spell properly between them. Draco, said Hermione, we are asking you because your name is on it. My name is on quite a lot of things, said Draco Malfoy. Feed it to the fire. Ron opened the sink for the last time on the 30th of May, 1999, and Bill Weasley went down alone with 2 rods and a hammer and broke the seal on the neck of the vein from the inside, which is the most dangerous thing anybody does in this story, and which took him 14 minutes. And then he climbed back up a rope ladder faster than he has ever admitted to. The burn went into Salazar Slytherin's quarter of the binding at about 9 o'clock that evening. There was nothing to see. The water in the chamber did not boil, and the walls did not crack. What happened was that the warmth went out of that room over the course of about 4 hours, the way warmth goes out of a body, and the carved serpents on the walls became carvings of serpents, and the 60-foot skeleton on the floor became 60 feet of bone. It is still down there. Nobody has been able to open it since, because the door needed magic in it to work and there is none, and the sink on the second floor is a sink. They got 23 days. Bill's measurement was right. A binding that has eaten 1,000 years of another binding does not move for a while. It sat under that castle from the 30th of May until the 22nd of June, digesting, and every day of those 23 days, 311 people worked on the far shore of the lake. I want to give you that number properly, because it is the number that matters most in this whole story, and it is not 2. There were 62 goblin masons under Skarnak who cut and set every foundation stone, and who worked to a tolerance the wizards could not measure. There were 9 Weasleys and everyone they could shout at. There were all of the surviving staff of the school, including Professor Flitwick, in a chair with a blanket and a red pencil, checking arithmetic. There were 400 students who came in shifts, of whom about 240 were of age and did the heavy work, and about 160 were not, and carried water and food and did what they were told. There were the elves, all 91 of them, who did the thing nobody else could do, which was to organise it, because a Hogwarts elf can run a kitchen for 1,000 people, and a building site is only a kitchen with worse manners. Hagrid brought the timber down from the forest himself, and it was the largest single amount of physical labour performed by one person in modern British magical history. And he did it because Bill Weasley had said no spells on the ground within 100 yards of the site, and Hagrid had said that was all right then and picked up an axe. Firenze came out of the forest on the 4th day with 31 centaurs. He did not offer to help build. Centaurs do not build. What he offered was the thing the school had never had and never asked for, which was a boundary agreed with the people who lived there. It took 2 days of extremely careful talking with Hermione, and it produced 11 lines of the charter about the forest, and every one of those lines is a limit on the school and not on the centaurs. And Firenze read them and said that no wizard had put a limit on a wizard in writing in his lifetime. The merpeople sent up a delegation to the Shallows on the 9th day and negotiated for 6 hours in a language nobody present spoke well, with Ginny Weasley translating badly out of 2 years of Mermish lessons, and Luna Lovegood translating rather better out of nowhere anybody could identify. The late clause is 19 words long, and the merpeople have never once complained about it, which is unprecedented. And the ghost came across the water. They could not, of course. A ghost is tied to the place where they chose to stay, and every single one of them had chosen the castle. What Bathsheba Babbling found in the notebooks. On the 11th day, working at 4 in the morning because she could not sleep, was that the four had bound the ghost not to the walls but to the ground, which is why nearly headless Nick could go half a mile onto the lawn. And the ground was the vein, and the vein ran under the lake to the far shore. So on the 18th of June, 1999, 41 ghosts of Hogwarts walked across the bottom of the lake in the dark, in a line, through the weed and the silt and the cold, past the merpeople who came out to watch, and came up out of the shallows on the far shore. And the first one out of the water was the fat friar, who had been waiting 500 years for somebody to need him for something. The bloody baron came last and alone, an hour behind the rest, and Helena Ravenclaw was standing on the shore waiting for him. And whatever the two of them said to each other after 1,000 years is not recorded and is none of our business. They founded it on the 21st of June, 1999, at 4 in the morning on the shortest night of the year. Here is what a founding actually is, since you have come this far. There is a ring of foundation stone, cut and set. There is the charter, 900 words, carved into the inner face of that stone all the way round. And the carving must be done with something that will not weather in 1,000 years. There is the ground underneath, and there is the giving. The giving is the part nobody can help with, and the arithmetic of it is the cruelest thing in the notebooks. 4 founders gave a quarter each. 2 founders give a half each. That is all it is. There is no discount for being brave. Everybody offered. That has to be said. Ron offered twice, and the second time he shouted about it. Ginny offered, Neville offered, McGonagall offered, and when she was refused, went away and came back an hour later and offered again in writing. 22 other people offered in the last week, including on the 19th of June, by owl, in 11 words, Ambrose Selwyn, and they were all turned down for a reason that came out of the Hat's 4th session, and that Hermione had understood in October and had not told anybody until June. Every founder is an instruction. 4 founders were 4 instructions, and the 4 instructions did not agree, and the ground had been arguing with itself under that castle for 1,000 years, and every child who had ever felt a corridor turn cold at them had been standing in the middle of that argument. 6 founders would be 6 arguments. 26 would be a war. The cleanest possible binding is 1 voice. The most anybody had ever managed was 4. They managed 2, and they managed it because Harry Potter and Hermione Granger had spent 8 years in one another's company, had walked across Britain together with a tent and no plan, and agreed at the level where these things are counted about absolutely everything that mattered. That is why it is these 2, and not the 12 better qualified people standing behind them. Not power, not destiny, agreement. They cut the charter with the Elder Wand, both of them, taking it in turns for 11 hours, all the way round the inner face of the ring, and Bathsheba Babbling walked behind them checking every rune, and Flitwick sat in the middle in his chair checking her. And at 4 in the morning on the shortest night, when the carving was done, they gave. I'm not going to pretend I can describe it. Nobody who was there has ever described it well. And there were 311 of them, so it is not for want of witnesses. Hagrid cried, Ron did not, until afterwards. Dennis Creevey, aged 16, took 9 photographs with his brother's camera, and 8 of them came out completely white, and the 9th is the one you have seen. What people do agree on is the order of it. They spoke the 900 words out loud together, the whole thing, and it took 31 minutes. Then they put their hands flat on the stone, and then the ground took what it was owed, half of what each of them had, and it did not take it gently, and it did not take it quickly, and it took 4 minutes. Hermione Granger fainted. Harry Potter did not, and afterwards said that he wished he had. And the last thing, which was not in the notebooks, and which they had argued about for a week, was the wand. Harry had 30 days to surrender the Elder Wand to the Ministry, and he had spent 120. He could not give it to the Wizengamot, because he had read enough history to know what happens to that object in a locked room. He could not put it in the tomb, because the tomb was on ground that was going to be dead earth for 1,000 years. he could not keep it because he had watched exactly what it did to a better man than him. So at about 4:30 in the morning, with nothing left in him, Harry Potter put the Elder Wand flat against the foundation stone of the new school and gave it to the ground. The binding took it the way it had taken everything else, and the wand was not destroyed, and it was not hidden, and it is not lost. It is in the stone. It is in the doors and the walls and the floor of a school full of children, and it cannot be won because it cannot be beaten, because there is nothing there to duel. 1,000 years of wizards killed each other over the unbeatable wand. It is holding up a corridor. The burn came out from under the castle on the 26th of June, 5 days later, having finished its meal, and it came along the seam under the lake towards the far shore at 4 feet a day. And everybody had known for a month exactly what had to happen next, and nobody had known whether it would work. A binding can be told to do one thing at the moment it is made, and only one, and this was theirs. Salazar Slytherin, 1,000 years ago, had left 3 pages of notes on the problem of anchoring magic under moving water, and he had solved it badly, and the improvement on his method is the last 5 lines of the new charter. On the 6th of July 1999, the binding of the new school reached back along the seam to the narrowest point of it, 400 yards out under the lake, where the vein of deep magic is not 9 feet across, but a little under 2, and it closed it. It did not destroy anything. It simply took that 2-foot span of deep magic into itself and left a gap, and a gap in a seam is like a gap in a fuse. The burn arrived at the gap on the 11th of August 1999 and stopped because there was nothing on the other side to walk on. It is still there. Bill Weasley goes out on the lake twice a year in a boat with a rod and takes a measurement, and his son does it now, and it has not moved in a very long time, and it will sit in that dead ground with nothing to eat until presumably the world ends, which means the old castle is finished permanently. There will never be magic in that valley's eastern side again, because the seam under it is burnt and there is no more where that came from. They left it standing. That was Ginny Weasley's argument, and she won it in about 9 minutes. There were proposals to take it down for safety, for stone, and one extremely well-meaning proposal to rebuild the Great Hall as a memorial, and Ginny said that 400 people had already been asked to give up their school and were not going to be asked to watch it knocked over as well, and that everybody who died there died in that building, and that if the new school was going to be worth anything, then the children in it ought to be able to look out of the window and see what it cost. So it stands. It has stood for years now, empty, across a mile of water, with its towers still up and its windows dark, and the ivy is doing what ivy does. And on the 2nd of May, every year the whole school walks around the lake and stands in the courtyard, where a boy of 17 finished a war and reads out the names of the 50 who died defending it. One more thing about Lucius Malfoy, because I said there would be. On the 1st of July 1999, 10 days after the founding, a bank draft arrived at Gringotts for 250,000 galleons, made out to the account of the Goblin Masons, with no conditions attached to it, no clause requested, and no name on it anywhere. Skarnak knew whose vault it had come out of, because Skarnak was a contracts goblin, and there was no version of this world in which he did not know. He entered it in the ledger as an anonymous gift and said nothing to anybody for 19 years. Draco Malfoy found out about it in 2018, going through his father's papers after the funeral, and has never said one word about it in public. He told Harry Potter once, at a Quidditch match, in about 4 sentences, and then changed the subject. Now, the price. I've told you the arithmetic, but arithmetic is not the same as a life, so let me tell you what it actually did to them, because a story that ends at the triumphant bit is a story that is lying to you. Harry Potter never became an aura. The place was open. It stayed open for a year. Kingsley kept it open on purpose, and he could not take it, because half of his magic was in the ground of a school in the Highlands. He could still cast, he could light a room, mend a chair, produce a Patronus, and he was still, by any ordinary standard, a capable wizard. What he could not do was fight. He tried once, in a training duel with Ron in the autumn of 1999, as an experiment, and Ron disarmed him in about 6 seconds, and then went outside and stood in the garden for a while. Ron Weasley became an aura instead, and was one for 19 years, and ran the office for the last 6 of them. He was very good at it. And I do not think there is a single year of those 19 in which he did not think about the fact that he got that life, because his best friend gave his away, and I do not think he ever said so out loud. And I think Harry knew anyway. Hermione Granger did not become anything the Ministry had a title for. She had intended to go into magical law, and she did, sideways, for the rest of her life. And every case she took was about the Charter of 1999 and the 11 other magical institutions in Europe who wanted to copy it and had not understood what it cost. They both feel the school. That is the part nobody had put in the notebooks, because Slytherin had not written it down and the Hat could not remember it, and no living person had known it for 1,000 years. When you give half of yourself into a binding, you do not lose it. You are simply in two places for the rest of your life. They know when there are children inside the boundary and roughly how many. They know when the boundary is crossed at night. In February 2007, at 3:10 in the morning, in two different houses 200 miles apart, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger both sat up in bed at the same moment, and a barn on the east side of the school was on fire with 9 children in it, and everybody got out. Neither of them can be away for very long. Nobody has ever measured how long, because neither of them has ever been willing to find out. And the last thing on the list of what it cost, and the smallest, and the one Hermione mentioned most often in later years, is that she's not a great witch. She would have been. Everybody who taught her says so, and the examination records support it. And there is a version of Hermione Granger who spent 40 years doing original magic and changed the discipline, and that person does not exist. What exists instead is a woman with a 19-year-old's notebooks, half her magic in a hillside, and 900 words. She has said, when asked, that she thinks she got the better end of it. And she has said it in a tone of voice that does not invite a follow-up question. The doors opened on the 1st of September 1999. There were 513 students, which is more than the school had ever had, because 2 full-year groups came in at once, and because 81 children came who had never had a letter, and because 106 students who are now 19 and 20 came back to finish what the war had taken off them, and sat their ordinary wizarding level exams in a hall with children 6 years younger, and did not seem to mind, and were the best behaved cohort in the school's history. Minerva McGonagall was headmistress. Neither founder ever held the post, and neither of them ever attended a staff meeting, and both of those things were in the charter on purpose, in a clause that Percy Weasley drafted, and that Hermione called the most important, boring sentence she ever wrote. The register was signed in the entrance hall, at a table, by hand. And because Ginny Weasley's list had been in alphabetical order, and because nobody had thought to change the order, the first name written into the register of the school on the 1st of September 1999 is Nell Ashby, age 13, of Manchester, who had made every window in her mother's kitchen sing and had been taken to 2 doctors about it. She could not spell her own middle name, and she had to be helped with the quill. The portraits woke that morning, all of them, over about 2 hours as the corridors filled up. They had been rolled in linen in a warehouse in Diagon Alley for 11 months, and they had not been asleep in the sense of resting. They had been starved, and now there was something under the floor to feed them again. Sir Cadogan woke up shouting. The fat lady, whose canvas had been cut out of its frame with a kitchen knife by a crying herbology teacher, woke up in a new frame at the top of a new staircase, and immediately complained about the draft, and Professor Sprout had to go and sit down in a store cupboard for 10 minutes. Dumbledore's portrait was hung in the headmistress's office, at his own request, on the wall opposite the shelf with the hat on it. The two of them are said to have got on rather well. Argus Filch stood inside the doors with a ring of keys, which had 11 keys on it, and he did not have a great deal to do, because the building was 1 day old and nobody had yet had time to make a mess in it. So he stood in the middle of the entrance hall, in the noise of 500 children, and he stamped his boot on the flagstones, twice, hard, and he listened. It came back off the far wall a half second later. Dennis Creevey was 16, and he was in that hall, in the year that should have been his 5th, with his brother's camera. He took a photograph of 500 people from the top of the stairs. If you have seen one photograph from this whole story, it is that one. And if you look at the bottom left of it, at the very edge of the frame, there is a small figure in mid-air, about 9 feet off the ground with its arms out, upside down. Nobody knows how. Peeves was tied to the castle. He was as much a part of that building as foundations, and the building is across a mile of water and dead. Bathsheba Babbling wrote a paper about it. Bill Weasley took measurements for 3 years. Hermione Granger looked for the loophole for a decade and never found one. The best answer anybody has is Luna Lovegood's, and Luna Lovegood said, on the 1st of September, 1999, standing in the doorway with her hands in her pockets, that a poltergeist is not made by a building. It is made by children, over centuries, being unhappy in a place and having nowhere to put it. And there were 513 of them in that hall, and quite a lot of them had had a very bad 2 years. So he came. Or he was made again, which may be the same thing. He is there now, and he is worse than he ever was. And every headmaster since has tried to have him removed, and none of them has really meant it. 23 years later, in 2022, the charter was amended. It has only happened once, and it took 4 years to organise, and it required the staff, the elves, the ghosts, the students, the centaurs, the merpeople, the goblins who hold the doors, and every name on the school's register, all in one place, all agreeing on one day, because a girl of 19 wrote a sentence in 1999 that she genuinely hoped would make the thing impossible. They changed 6 words in the clause about the forest, at the request of the centaurs, in favour of the centaurs. Firenze was dead by then. His successor asked for it, and the school gave it. And the vote took 9 hours and was unanimous. And it is the only time in the recorded history of magic that all of those peoples have been in one room and agreed about anything. Harry Potter and Hermione Granger were both there, in the back, as required, because a living founder must be in the room. Harry was 42. Hermione was 43. They had, by then, entirely ordinary lives of the kind that neither of them had ever expected to get. Harry had married Ginny Weasley in 2000, and they had 3 children. Hermione had married Ron in 2001, which surprised nobody who had ever watched the two of them argue about a map. Draco Malfoy was there too, in the 3rd row, because his son was a student and every name on the register had to be in the room. That was the whole reason he had walked into a kitchen at number 12, Grimmauld Place, in October 1998, with a folder under his arm, and he had said so out loud at the time, and it had taken 23 years to come true. Neville Longbottom had been teaching herbology in that building for 11 years and was better at it than anybody had expected, including him. They both voted yes, and neither of them spoke. And afterwards, Hermione stood outside the great doors, which a goblin made and have a goblin's name cut into the inside edge of the left-hand one, and looked across a mile of water at the ruin of the school she went to when she was 11. And somebody asked her the question. People always asked her, which was whether she thought the 4 would have approved. She said she had no idea. She said she had spent a year in a cold chamber under a lake reading the private notes of one of them, and the thing she took away was that he had made one mistake in 900 words and had been too proud to correct it, and it had cost 1,000 years, and that she thought about that on most days. Then she said the thing that I think is the whole point of this, and it is the last thing I've got for you. We did not build a better school than theirs, she said. We had their notes. Anyone could have done what we did with their notes. She looked at the water for a while. We built one that can be told it is wrong. That is all we did. That is the entire difference. And it took 2 of us half of everything we had, and if we had got the wording of that one line even slightly wrong, we would have handed the next 1,000 years to whoever came along with 40 votes, and a good reason. Somebody asked what the ground would have done then. Exactly what it was told, said Hermione Granger. It always does. That is what nobody understands about it. It is not wise, it is not kind, and it is not on anybody's side. It is a very old thing that does what it is told, forever, by whoever was brave enough or stupid enough to put their hand on it and say what they wanted. She picked up her bag. We happen to want a door, she said. That is our timeline. If you take one thing from it, I hope it is the smallest thing in it, which is that the whole story turns on a caretaker, with no magic at all, noticing that a corridor had stopped echoing. Tell me in the comments which clause you would have fought them on, because I think there is a real argument about the amendment line, and I have changed my mind about it twice while writing this,